October 16th, you held a grand jury for the Dane Paulsen case. What came of that?
So yes, we presented the case to the grand jury here in Lincoln County. They ultimately heard from several different witnesses who were all sworn under oath and provided testimony that was relevant to Dane Paulsen's disappearance. And ultimately, the grand jury indicted the father, Aaron Paulson, on one count of child neglect in the second degree.
And his partner, Shamet, was also presented to the grand jury, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So why was it important for you to have a grand jury in this case? Because you didn't need to, right?
Correct. So child neglect in the second degree is a Class A misdemeanor. Typically, that would be something that just a DDA or a deputy district attorney or myself could review the police reports and we could file a district attorney information on a misdemeanor charge. However, due to kind of the vastness of evidence in this case, also I think the sensitive nature of the fact that obviously we all know that Dane ended up being deceased, I felt that it was really important for our community to be part of that decision-making process. The grand jury serves some really important roles. Not only do we take every felony case through the grand jury for them to essentially be a check on our ability to charge cases and making sure that we're making good charging decisions by there being sufficient evidence in felony cases, but the grand jury also serves as sometimes an investigatory body. So for example, I use the grand jury anytime we have an officer-involved shooting to determine whether or not that officer's actions in that particular case were justified. There are some counties and some district attorneys that make that decision on their own, where I could review all the evidence and I would say, yes, this law enforcement officer was justified, or no, they were not. But I think it's really important for us to use the grand jury in those types of big decisions and making sure that our community is listening to the evidence and ultimately making the final decision in that case. And that's really what I felt about Dane Paulsen's case as well. I can tell you that our grand jurors, we kind of cycle through them every 2 months. So that in Lincoln County, they serve one day for 2 months and then their term is over. And so the grand jury at the time that Dane went missing and ultimately was found was really interested in this case. They obviously had been seeing a lot of things on the news. There was a lot of things on Facebook, a lot of conflicting information was out there, and they actually had raised to me that they thought that might be a case that they wanted to hear. Now, obviously, we didn't have enough resources, and the investigation was ongoing for some time, and so they ultimately did not hear that case. But I really took that to heart in thinking about what to do with Dane's case, and so that's why I ultimately decided to bring it to the grand jury, because I just think that it's really important to have people from our community. 7 grand jurors, they don't know anyone in the case. They don't, they're not looking to prosecute anyone. They're not looking to get anyone off. They're really just there to listen to the evidence and to decide whether or not there's sufficient evidence that a crime had occurred. And so I just think it's a really great, check on the system. And it's not just me making the decision, it's our community making the decision based on what we want to see happen on any given case.
And it was 5 of the 7 jurors who chose to charge Aaron Paulsen, correct?
So I didn't specifically ask for a number. So typically when I come back in the room, they will just tell me whether they true billed something or whether they no true billed something. In order to true bill something, though, the grand jury knows that they have to have at least 5 out of the 7 of them vote to true bill. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the specific, it could be 7-0, it could be 6-1, it could be 5-2, but I know that at least 5 of them would have had to true bill the indictment in order for them to all return a true bill. I guess for them to be able to sign a true bill on the indictment, if that makes sense.
So at least 5.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
So then let's talk about the evidence even that you presented in court today. Tell me a little bit about what came out, because you did shed some light in about that day that Dane went missing.
Mm-hmm. So I think that, this case, I think, touches a lot of people. It's scary, right? Thinking that, a 2-year-old could end up in a river, drowned and die. I mean, it's a traumatic event, not only, I think, for the family, but I think it's touched a lot of people's lives in our community. And honestly, I think probably nationwide at this point is how far Dane's story has reached. What the evidence and through the investigation really showed, though, was that Miss Jackson, who's Dane's mother, brought Dane back into the house, and that he was in kind of the care and custody of his father, Dane Paulsen, at the time that Dane ended up walking out of the house. Mr. Paulson, according to his statements to law enforcement, knew that there wasn't any other adult supervision outside. He knew that his wife was tending to her father in a fifth wheel on the property, and he did not follow after Dane when he saw Dane leave the house. And we all know Dane was around 2 at the time. And so ultimately what the grand jury was deciding was whether or not there was any type of negligence on behalf of Mr. Paulson in not following after Dane and not, I guess, walking after him when he saw him going outside and kind of disappearing in the yard. And according to Mr. Paulson, it was about 15 minutes that he didn't have eyes on Dane before realizing that Dane was missing, and that he only realized that because Miss Jackson came back in the property or inside the house. And essentially was looking for Dane, and that's kind of what first alerted everyone that Dane was missing. There's also evidence that there's a river trail on the property about 150 feet from the residence, that Dane loved the water, was very familiar with the water, but didn't know how to swim. And that trail had not been blocked off by the family, even though they had purchased some fencing material to do so. So ultimately, the grand jury was deciding whether or not there was any type of negligence or whether or not this truly was just a tragic accident. I really think that, and I'm sure everyone would agree with me, that one child death in our county is one too many, right? And what I think the grand jury is so useful for is really determining whether or not it was just a tragic accident or whether or not there was something that could have been done to prevent, this situation from happening. And ultimately, I think what the grand jury found was that there was some type of neglect on behalf of Dane Paulsen's behalf that left Dane in a situation where it was dangerous for him to be in, if that makes sense.
I spoke with Shamet the other day, and she mentioned that she really does believe that somebody had taken her son. Did your office look into that at all?
So the grand jury did hear that piece of the investigation. I know that there was a vehicle that was seen in the area, and ultimately law enforcement did track down the owner of that vehicle. And so the grand jury heard that piece of the investigation as well. I think what's really important when we do present a case to the grand jury is that it's not just me picking and choosing the pieces that are helpful, to my theory of the case, but they really do hear a whole of what the investigation looked like. So they heard what the search and rescue efforts were. They saw the map of where, everything was searched and what was found and what was deemed to be helpful and not helpful, things like that. But they also heard the investigation into that vehicle and the driver of that vehicle. But ultimately that did not pan out to be, fruitful, I don't think that's the right word, but ultimately that the evidence did not point to the fact that Dane was taken or kidnapped or killed. The evidence really pointed to the fact that Dane went down that river's edge and fell into the river and ultimately drowned.
And 2 more questions. Another thing I see online of people speculating about this diaper, that maybe someone had taken off his diaper and dumped it before taking him or putting him in the river. Did your office look into that too?
Yes, so the grand jury also heard evidence regarding that, but they also heard evidence that essentially, the diaper was not the diaper that Dane was wearing that day. It was found to be that there was when they had taken their garbage out, which is on the highway, that some type of animal had knocked the garbage can over that had kind of, had trash go out. And they believe that the diaper likely came from the garbage can as it was located on the other side of the highway.
Last question, is there a myth or a misconception that you've seen since this case started or came to your desk in March that you're like, I'd like to clear this up?
I don't know if I have anything to clear up right now. I think that my biggest goal in this job really is to just seek justice and accountability. In this particular case, Mr. Paulson's been charged with a Class A misdemeanor. There's absolutely no way he could do prison time on a charge like that. He will, if ultimately he's convicted of this, and obviously he has the presumption of innocence until he changes his plea or we go to trial. But ultimately, I don't anticipate him serving any lengthy prison sentence or a lengthy jail sentence for that matter. But what I think is important is justice looks differently in different cases. And if there was some type of neglect in any child death, I would anticipate that we as a community would want to hold people accountable for that type of neglect. And so as much as I think people maybe have the opinion that I'm trying to ruin people's lives or re-traumatize the family or things like that, what I really want is justice for Dane. And seeking justice for Dane was presenting the case to the grand jury and letting them decide whether or not there was neglect. And ultimately, that was a decision they made without really much input from me. I really only advised them of what charges could fit the circumstances, and this was the charge that they chose based on the evidence that they heard. And so really, my goal here is to seek justice and accountability, and using the grand jury as a tool to help me determine where we go, what road we go down, and that's really my goal in this particular case.